Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the BI Washington Policy Pulse. My name is Nathan Dean, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about what we're seeing this week. We'll start off with Kamala Harris's speech from last Friday, her economic speech. We'll talk about the Democratic National Convention in my hometown of Chicago. If you're out there, my pizza recommendations are Lou Malnati's, Pequod's, and Giordano's. And then we'll talk about the Basel III Endgame, and then finally we'll talk about crypto. Again, if you need any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at ndean10@bloomberg.net, or you can use the chat function here in the Zoom call as well. So let's talk about Kamala Harris and the speech from Friday. So this was an economic speech. This was fairly light, fairly quick. That was unanticipated, but we did not think, or light on details was anticipated. Right now, Kamala Harris is running a campaign essentially under the idea is that she's not President Trump, she's not President Biden, she's not 80 years old. And eventually, we are going to have to get to a point where we are going to learn more about policies, but we're just not there yet. What she did say in the speech was she talked about price gouging on on retailers and consumers, namely food, grocery stores, if you will. She called for a national implementation of price gouging. You don't need to be me to know that that's going to come via an act of Congress, and that's not going to happen. But what could potentially happen would be something more similar to what President Biden did earlier this year when he signed an executive order essentially stating that his administration will try and combat price gouging and work with the industry or pressure the industry in certain cases to keep food prices from rising further. So if Kamala Harris wins, I would anticipate her writing an executive order at the beginning of next year essentially directing the Federal Trade Commission to look into bad actors in the grocery store space. Now, it's kind of hard to predict who's a bad actor. Is there even bad acting going on? Not exactly sure. But just to remember that as Attorney General of California, she teamed up with 48 other states to have a $25 billion settlement on home foreclosures that included Bank of America and Wells Fargo. So she has certainly done something like this before. And I think if she was president, she would definitely direct the Federal Trade Commission to do additional investigations. Certainly an enforcement risk, not so much a policy risk, and potentially there's some headline risk there as well. Now, when it comes to the Democratic National Convention, there's a couple things to note. President Biden speaks tonight. President Obama speaks Tuesday. President Clinton speaks on Wednesday before Governor Tim Walz. Remember, the vice presidential candidate always speaks on Wednesday. And then Kamala Harris speaks on Thursday. Now, I think her speech, again, is going to be somewhat light on details, probably broad, probably going from a range different of ideas. Like she may tout the $6,000 child tax credit that she talked about in the economic speech, which, for what it's worth, Senator J.D. Vance actually proposed a $5,000 child tax credit a couple of days before her speech, but also this idea of $20,000 tax credit for home buyers that are purchasing their first new homes. We often tell our clients is just remember the president, potential candidates and presidents often have ideas on taxes, but it's ultimately the House of Representatives and the chairman or the chairwoman of the House Ways and Means Committee that ultimately decides where the tax debate is going to go. Tax always originates in the House, then goes to the Senate, and then eventually will go to the president's desk. So the president is certainly influential. I mean, look, the president's the one who has to sign off on the bill. But a lot of times, the president comes out and says, I want to do this on taxes, and the good folks on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue say, oh, that's great, nice idea, but we're going to write it ourselves. So just, again, keep that in mind. I do think her speech, though, is going to not include things like I've had some chatter with some marijuana lobbyists. They think that marijuana will be included in that speech. I'd be shocked if it did. If it is, for example, and I'm wrong, you're certainly welcome to come here to the Bloomberg office and I'll buy you a free Bloomberg cup of coffee, but I don't think it's going to be included in that. So let's talk about the Basel III Endgame for a moment. So the Basel III Endgame is this proposal from the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Our buddy Katanga Johnson over at Bloomberg News put out a big article on Friday saying that Jerome Powell had met with the big banks to talk about trying to come up with an agreement on the Basel III Endgame, if you will. Now, notably absent from that meeting was the Fed Vice Chairman Michael Barr, the one who's driving this proposal. Additionally, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the FDIC. Now, what we think has happened, why that meeting happened, is for this reason. One, the proposal of the Basel III Endgame has has capital requirements going up 19%. In the European Union, it's 10%. In the United Kingdom, it's 3% for their Basel IV implementation, their version of the Basel III Endgame. Now, historically, the American banks have always gone to the regulators and just said, we want a level playing field. Now, they don't exactly get that, but they're somewhat comfortable if it's in the same ballpark. But going from 3 to 10 to 19%, that's just a little bit too much than I think that the banks would want to stomach. So Earlier this year, in March, Elliot Stein and I hosted on Votes and Verdicts, our podcast, Eugene Scalia, the former Labor Secretary, and now partner at Gibson Dunn, who's been retained by the banking industry to potentially sue on the Basel III endgame. And the Fed knows this. They know that because of the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court and the way the courts are ruling these days, the Basel III endgame, no matter what, is kind of iffy in terms of, is going to get a legal challenge. So they got to make sure everything's right. So I think that's why Jerome Powell held this meeting, is because he's trying to stave off this idea. Look, if we can come to an agreement, don't sue us, and we can actually get this done and go forth. Now, can they come to an agreement? I don't know. I mean, I think somebody is going to sue out there, but we have seen a statement from Morgan Stanley earlier this year that potentially they may be on board, but with just coming to an agreement, but we just don't know. And I should also state, because the OCC and the FDIC weren't in that meeting, they could easily just go to the Fed and say, I'm not part of this. I don't agree. We're just going to fight this out on Capitol Hill and try and put more political pressure on you. So we'll see. The next major catalyst, and we should get a little bit more information after Labor Day, is we are anticipating a reproposal on portions of it, as well as this quantitative impact statement. But don't be surprised if this gets pushed out even further. If it doesn't happen this year, I'm not even sure the rule can get done in 2025. We'll see, but this rule is really slipping really quickly, and anytime it slips, it's just going to get pushed further and further back. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is cryptocurrency policy, because Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, made some comments before going to Chicago for the convention that he was going to make this push on cryptocurrency to try and get a cryptocurrency framework out this year. I don't think it's going to happen. And that includes stablecoin bills that I had said earlier this year was going to pass. So again, if you come to the Bloomberg office, I will give you a free Bloomberg coffee, because it looks like I may be wrong on that one. But we have not seen any language from the House Financial Services Committee that's working on this. This is the chairman, Patrick McHenry, the ranking member, Maxine Waters. We haven't seen any language on that. We haven't seen any language or any type of legislation from Senator Debbie Stabenow, the chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee. She had pushed for a pre-August recess vote. She didn't get that. Senator Lummis of Wyoming had put out new legislation. She's not getting a vote on this. And all of a sudden, you have Chuck Schumer saying, we're going to get this done before the end of the year. Just remember, in September, they're all going to be trying to deal with the government funding, and then we're in the lame duck. And when it comes to the lame duck session, I'm not exactly sure it's going to happen, because either President Trump wins or Vice President Harris wins. And I just think that Congress at that point will say, you know what, there's bipartisan warmth moving on cryptocurrency. Let's, rather than trying to get something done right now, let's see if we can get a better deal in 2025. What that better deal is, I don't know, but certainly I just think that, again, it depends on the outcome of the election, but I'm not sure lame duck is exactly where it is. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for attending. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and I wish you a great week. Thank you.